on HP. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to dive right into the very first question, which is one of the things that led to this topic in conversation amongst us when we were discussing, where are the areas for opportunity? And one of the obvious areas is in banking. But I wanted to get your perspective in terms of how do you see this pandemic impacting the banking industry relative to fintech technologies?
Sure. Thank you, Catalina, for that fantastic introduction. It's my honor to be here talking to you today. Yeah, if you could go to slide 2 and we'll start there.
Let me minimize this and have us go right to the presentation.
Beautiful. So there was already a shift going on from physical channels to digital channels in banking. And I think that shift has dramatically accelerated due to the pandemic. And increasingly, clients will expect that they can bank from anywhere, anytime, and essentially never have to come into a branch, never have to physically meet with a banker. And I really think we are now at the cusp of a major change in sort of what the physical channel looks like. I think that, the old style branch platform and teller will be obsolete here very shortly. I think the branch is going to transform from a place that you transact to a place that you go to learn, to explore different options, to build financial plans, to talk with a specialist about complex needs. I think every transactional need will essentially be met using self-service via a virtual channel. And as a result, clients will reward simplicity and speed. They are really going to, I think, punish banks and fintechs that have a cumbersome process or that make things overly complex, make it difficult to find what they need or to execute the transaction they want to execute. I think increasingly clients are going to expect that everything is possible remotely, and that what they need will be simple to find and simple to execute. And the challenge for banks and fintechs is, how do you get to know these clients that you have few, if any, opportunities to physically interact with? And I think that is going to be a challenge. And increasingly, clients are going to expect that you know who they are and you know what they need, and you're not peppering them with irrelevant offers and contacting them for needs that they don't have, or trying to sell them something that isn't relevant to them and their situation. So I think the trick is going to be really figuring out how to leverage all the data you have about your clients and about their behaviors and about their situations and about changes in their lives that may have given rise to new needs, or to needs that you can fill, or that you can proactively anticipate. But I think that's going to become an imperative that banks really leverage, and fintechs leverage the data that they have to figure out who their customers are and what they need, and that there'll be relevant and timely and value-added interactions with them, despite the lack of physical opportunities to meet and interact.
Hmm. Yeah, and I, as I'm listening to you describe these, certainly some of these already existed. Some of these needs and some of these expectations already existed by customers prior to the pandemic. But I think you're right. Without more or with less interaction, it's just going to accelerate it. So that brings me to the next question, HP, and that is, you know, you were seeing this, some of this when you were at DataRobot running the banking vertical for them. But clearly you saw some gaps that led you to found or to start your business, AI powered banking. And so my question to you is, what gaps, what industry or business gaps did you see while you were at DataRobot that propelled you to start your own firm after you left?
Yeah, awesome question. So what I tried to do on the next couple slides are sort of talk about what I see as some of the classic mistakes that many banks and fintechs make, and what some of the opportunities are here to leverage the emerging technologies to approach it in the right way. So let me just kind of tackle them one at a time. Number one is a lot of banks and fintechs, I think, take a somewhat passive approach to data and analytics. They make the right investments in platforms and tools and you know, people with the right skill sets, and then they, you know, sort of stand back and hope that good things happen. And I think in many cases they are disappointed in the return on investment. And I think that's largely because they, you know, leave it up to the technical people to figure out how to use these cool technologies, rather than really engage the business leaders and think about how they leverage these technologies to rethink their business. And you know, what I see a lot of banks and fintechs doing are applying some of the, for example, the sophisticated machine learning techniques to improve models that they've had forever. And that'll work. You can get improvement in, you know, your models, but, you know, incremental improvement is just that. It's incremental improvement. Whereas if you think about the business that you're in and how you can apply predictive analytics, AI, machine learning at each stage of the business, that will give you dramatically better results. But it requires you think about business process and operating model and how to implement new, you know, predictive engines and recommendation engines into people's everyday work. That's harder. That requires, you know, much more change management, much more leadership, much more of, you know, sort of bold thinking about, you know, what the business could be, you know, and it's a lot safer to just sort of incrementally improve. But I think the companies that, you know, sort of are willing to think boldly about what the business could become with the power of some of these new technologies are the ones that are going to outperform. The second sort of classic problem I see is around organizational structure. And a lot, the traditional organizational structure, I mean, to put it as simply as I can, just does not work for AI and machine learning. You know, what I've seen happen so often is that the data scientists are kind of left to do everything themselves, from acquiring the data to preparing the data to cleansing the data to building the models to testing the models to documenting the models to implementing the models, running the models, maintaining the models, you know, from you know, alpha to omega, right? They're doing everything. And I've heard some chief data scientists complain that they spend 80% of their time just getting the data or operating the models they've already created, and only 20% of the time actually doing anything related to data science. Well, that's a symptom of a classic organizational problem, right? That they haven't got all the right people engaged in the process, from the data engineers to acquire the data, to the business leadership to make sure that it's implemented into the production process and operating model correctly, to IT, if with the application integration and the ongoing monitoring and operation and change management around models, to the data people who sort of support the platforms and make sure that the models are fed with the right data on an ongoing basis, and the data change management is done well. It really does require that you think through all of the roles and responsibilities around both descriptive and predictive analytics, so that you've got all the right people doing the right things. If you don't do that, then you end up either severely constraining your ability to get things deployed and into actual use, or you end up with very, very expensive people trying to do it all, which just it's just enormously inefficient, and the opportunity cost is just massive.
And it sounds, HP, if I may interrupt, it sounds like it's both having the right people in the right roles, but also understanding both the technical and the business model and the business goal, right? In other words, singing from the same page.
That's exactly right. The third classic problem I see is governance. And I'm not saying governance is a bad thing. Governance is an absolutely necessary thing. But if you put too much governance around predictive models, you can absolutely smother creativity and innovation. And I've seen this happen at some big banks that I could, that everybody on the call has heard of, where the model risk management is so severe, right, that it really constrains the ability to get things built and get them tested and validated and deployed. On the other hand, I have seen organizations that really don't govern models sufficiently. And what happens there is you can have the data scientists build some wonderful models, and they run them and they operate them and they send out the results, but they really haven't been tested and haven't been validated and aren't well documented. So you've got key man risk, and you've got operational risks, and you've got reputational risks, and you may have regulatory risks that with insufficient governance can even create a huge model risk debt over time that eventually will have to be paid. I could name another bank that recently did a survey to find how many predictive models they had sort of developed and in use sort of out in the field, and they found thousands of models. And now they're trying to figure out, well, how do we go back and test them and validate them and document them and ensure that they've used the right data appropriately. So governance is a balancing act. You've got to have enough, but not too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fourth big challenge, and I'm sure everybody has seen this, is that the demand for data scientists far exceeds the supply. And that is just going to get worse. Fortunately, the technology is, I think, potentially coming to the rescue. And that is automated machine learning. And automated machine learning can not only make data scientists, far more productive, like 10 times more productive, but potentially allow non-data scientists, business analysts, data analysts, who really know the data well, to build some very, very sophisticated models without having to know the mechanics of like a neural network or a decision tree or a gradient boosted tree or what have you. But, you know, at last count, there were 12 vendors out there that claimed to be the best in the auto ML game. And, you know, I've looked at them all, and I can tell you that there are many of them that are anything but. You know, they claim to be, you know, very sophisticated in predictive analytics, but, you know, they're not. Or they claim to have, you know, everything sort of the whole value chain automated in their auto ML solution. They just have one little tiny bit, right? That's built. So auto ML, I think, is potentially a massive game changer in this space, but there's no good definition of auto ML. You can't go to a Gartner and say, give me a magic quadrant for auto ML. I wish you could. And so there's no standard definition, and a lot of vendors claim to have auto ML, and they don't. They have, you know, they have something far from it. There's a lot of charlatans in the industry, unfortunately. And you know, because of the backlog, what you see is a lot of data science starting to occur outside of the formal data science community. And the proper way to think about it is what's called the democratization of data science, where AI is starting to break out of, right, the central data science group, just like BI broke out of data processing, you know, 25 years ago. We're at the same stage in AI, where AI is going to become pervasive. It's going to be something that practically anybody with the right tools and technologies and knowledge of the data can build. And you know, whether you are for the democratization of data science or against the democratization of data science, sort of like it or not, it's here. And the technologies are now powerful enough that you know, practically anybody with a couple days training can build an enormously sophisticated model. Now, we could argue about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. You know, it could be a really bad thing, right? If somebody goes and uses completely inappropriate data to do a completely inappropriate thing, right? But it could be a really, really good thing, right? If it helps, you know, the organization, you know, be far more productive and get, you know, more done faster at lower cost and be more nimble and bring more things to market. But, you know, it really is going to be a significant governance challenge. And I think that the companies that sort of think this through right, you know, get the governance right, figure out their strategy around democratization and the use of auto ML, I think there's a real opportunity here for some organizations to just break away from the pack.
Yeah, the opportunities are tremendous, no question about it. And again, as I listen to you, what comes to mind is, you know, how do these companies and how do these leaders make decisions in order to make sure that that it allows them to gain a competitive advantage? And, you know, what are the differences to do that for startups versus existing and established incumbents in order to, you know, how do they use this in order, these technologies in order to gain competitive advantage?
Yeah, awesome question. So, you know, you've probably heard a lot of talk about becoming AI driven or becoming AI enabled. And, you know, that all sounds sort of cool, but, you know, the question is, how do you do it? And I think first and foremost, you have to train everyone on AI and machine learning. And I really do mean everyone, from the board of directors down to the lowest level employee. And I don't mean train them on data science. Like nobody knows how to, you know, what a support vector machine is, or what a you know, deep neural network is, and how the math works. That's not what I mean. But what I do mean is that everybody should understand what AI and machine learning are, and they should know how to spot a good use case. and know what the characteristics of a good use case are, so that when they see something that would be just an incredible application of AI machine learning, that they recognize it, right? And what will happen is, really good ideas will sort of start to percolate, right, in every part of the organization. And I think you really should encourage experimentation and give people access to the tools and the data so that they can prototype. Now, with the appropriate rules of the road, right? I'm not suggesting anybody can do anything with any data for any reason, anyhow, anywhere. There should be rules about who has access to what data, and what you can prototype, and if you want to get it into actual use, what the steps are that you have to go through to do that. But I do think that enabling people to experiment and to prototype, and giving them forums to share best practices and good ideas around what seems to be really working well and adding value, I think can overnight, right, just making those tools and technologies available and training people on the basic concepts of AI machine learning and what a good use case looks like can really accelerate the use of AI and machine learning. And a lot of people have asked, well, does that mean smaller organizations will challenge large organizations? And maybe, but I've also seen some really, really, really big organizations, like one of the top 5 banks in the country, that is doing this extraordinarily well, and really creating an AI-aware, AI-enabled, AI-driven organization, and implementing these types of technologies and the right kind of governance framework everywhere throughout their organization. And I think this bank is going to really surprise a lot of people in terms of how quickly they're able to leverage some of these new technologies. So yeah, I think it's probably easier if you're smaller and you sort of start out as AI enabled than it is for a big organization to transform and become AI enabled. But I've seen some really, really big banks do this extremely well. So as the old saying goes, elephants can dance.
Excellent, thank you. These are all great suggestions, and I know that you have experience in working with a lot of the banks that are trying to do this. So as they're doing this, what do you find are the decision drivers that these financial services companies and businesses need to consider when they're about to make significant strategic investments? What should those drivers be?
So one of the classic mistakes I see is organizations pursuing uses of AI and machine learning that look sort of cool and interesting, but that are a bit fanciful in terms of the level of effort that's going to be required to get the data that they need all organized in one place. They may have data in 50 different places that has to be extracted and assembled and cleansed and standardized. And, that's a project in and of itself. And, if your AI project has a, prerequisite of, a 2-year data architecture effort, then, even if the AI use case is pretty cool,
HP, I think we lost you. HP, we lost your voice. We're concerned about this because he's on an island in New York. So I'm going to ask HP that you transfer.
Hey, sorry about that. I'm back on the phone.
You're on your cell? Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. We knew this was going to happen, so I'm glad we had
it could happen.
Go ahead.
So, I think that you really have to be cautious of embarking on something that potentially has a massive, prerequisite or massive upfront investment requirement that you know, even though the AI itself may look, you know, may look very, you know, attractive in terms of its return because of the investment that's going to be required in order to bring it to market. You know, there's just, it has a huge opportunity cost. So one of the things I suggest is look at things in a simple grid, right? Based on the value that it brings and the complexity.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually did this with a business line head at a big bank in Singapore, where I was last November. And, you know, they had a list of 50 or 60 great ideas. And over a half a day, we grouped them on this grid by value and by cost. And, you know, there was a lot of debate about where things should sit on the grid. And it was a really great, you know, sort of discussion. But, you know, most of it was pretty quick, right? You know, 50 of the 60 ideas we quickly were able to land in one of these grids. And then there was, you know, a lot more discussion around, you know, say 10 of them. But eventually we got the grid all filled out. And it was very, very clear at the end of the discussion that there were about 8 ideas down here in quadrant 1 that were low cost, high value. And I said, you know, look, I think we've just convinced ourselves those are the 8 you got to start tomorrow, right? Mm-hmm. Tomorrow morning, get started on those 8. And then there were another 12 or so that were up here in the high cost, high value. And I said, you know, let's not ignore those. Let's while you've started the other 8, let's separately investigate these 12, right? And look at what it's going to cost to do them, what, you know, potentially we could do to simplify the use case, and, you know, really quantify the value, right? And if the value is really, you know, provably and demonstrably high, then maybe the investment is worth it, and we need to, you know, you need to get on with those. But it was a really good discussion, and I think we quickly were able to figure out, you know, sort of which ones were the ones that they needed to get moving on quickly.
Yeah, that's a practical approach. Excellent, excellent. And so give us a couple of examples of, you know, making sure that you're picking the right problem, because to solve, you know, we asked the question around AI, you know, our firms, our leaders asking the right questions and solving the right problems. And I think this model really helps them get at that. But give us a couple of examples, HP, if you will, of a couple of projects or work efforts that you saw where it made a big difference to pick the right case and the right problem to solve.
Yeah, these are some of my favorites. One of the ones we did for a big bank was around pricing. And what we found was that their pricing was, shall we say, haphazard. And what they were not doing is really pricing in a disciplined way, and pricing aggressively where the return was good, and pricing a little more conservatively where the return was a little bit less than average. Mm-hmm. And what we did was we built 2 models. We built both a price elasticity model as well as a profit predictor model. And what we did was allowed them to not only predict what the value of a particular piece of business was, but then to build a price elasticity curve for that particular client, so they knew at what price they would be likely to get the business versus unlikely to get the business. And as a result, they were able to not only get more business, but at a higher average margin. That was a great use case. Mm-hmm. Another fintech, and this is one everybody's heard of, where they were offering, making lending options available to borrowers. And what they were doing is presenting many, many options to borrowers. And what they found was that their take-up rate was actually falling as they were presenting more options, which is sort of counterintuitive, right? you give the client more choice, you would think your take-up rate would be improving, but actually it was falling. The clients were sort of overwhelmed by the choice. And what we were able to do is to build, based on all of the presentments ever made and whether those offers were accepted, we were able to build a model to predict for each client which offer had what probability of being accepted. And then we were able to take for a new client and say, okay, of all the offers, let's pick the 3 that have the highest probability of matching that particular client's value function, have the highest probability of being offered. And as a result, we were able to not only sort of reduce the clutter, right? Show the potential client the 3 offers that were likely to be of the highest value to them, but also it increased the take-up rate, not only back to where it had been, but over the baseline. So better for the client, better for the fintech. Another great example, and I know we're running a little short of time here, so I'll keep these short. I could talk for 15 minutes about any one of these. You know, in credit, you know, I see so many banks and fintechs sort of racing to try to get the best credit risks, right, and minimize losses, right, and you know, the problem is that you're chasing kind of the same population of clients, and the margins get smaller and smaller and smaller. And what you can do with AI is you can actually predict not just the risk characteristics of a loan, but also the risk-adjusted return characteristics of a loan. And I did some work with a small business lender in Chicago, and we were able to actually figure out that they were pricing their risks all wrong. That they were going aggressively into some segments which were actually pretty risky, and they were pricing more conservatively for some segments where actually there was a bit less risk. And what we were able to do is say, you know, you can actually take a little more risk in these segments because the risk-adjusted return in these segments is very attractive. So yes, it's a little more risky than what you had been doing, but the return more than compensates for the incremental risk. And you just couldn't do that before AI and machine learning. That just was not a business model you could even think about, that kind of very proactive portfolio strategy of designing a risk-adjusted return set of characteristics you were after, and then finding the segments that had exactly those kind of characteristics. But with AI, you can, and that's what's sort of cool there.
Yeah. I'm sorry, it goes back to really knowing your customer, right? And your customer's segments, because the offerings have to be a value add.
Exactly. And that leads right into the next topic, which is relationship deepening. You know, everybody knows that deeper relationships are more profitable and more loyal. And a lot of banks and fintechs have, you know, a large percentage of pretty thin relationships. And what you want to do is you want to deepen those relationships. And the way to do that is to anticipate client needs, very proactively identify when there's an emerging need or when there's an unmet need that you can proactively meet. And with AI, you can do that. There are so many great examples of predicting needs with AI that it would take, you know, a whole other presentation to walk through them all. But it works really, really well. And almost every bank and fintech I talk to has more than enough data to build these types of models. We worked with a firm in Singapore building a valuation model for M&A advisory work, and they were very, very pleased with the precision they were able to get in that valuation model. In financial crime, AI and machine learning can work brilliantly in fraud detection and in detecting, you know, what are becoming increasingly sophisticated money laundering schemes. So it's a really good way to detect financial crime not only more effectively, but a whole lot more efficiently without spending a whole bunch of money trying to do it and do it poorly.
Yeah, yeah. Fantastic. You're right. I wish we had more time to go into these, but maybe we will bring you back for some of this. In the last few minutes, the last question, and then I want to open it up for another minute if we can for the group. This is very much, as you know, FinTech Women geared towards women advancement of the career. And one of the things I wanted to ask you was, what are the talents and skills and competencies that you feel are important as individuals and as leaders are hiring people to fill these roles to do all of what you talked about here? And how specifically do women shine in this area?
Yeah, I love that question. You know, a lot of companies are looking for deep data science talent, and you know, I'm not suggesting that you don't need data science talent. I think data science talent is necessary, but it's not sufficient. I think the people that are going to excel are the ones that have an understanding of the analytics, right? That know what is possible, that know what some of the emerging technologies can do. And again, you don't have to learn them all, but just, you know, like go get a demo of DataRobot, go get a demo of Dataiku, go get a demo of H2O, driverless AI. You know, just be aware of what these technologies are and you know, what's emerging, right? What is becoming possible. And the people that really think broadly and strategically about how these can be applied, I think those are the people that are going to really shine. And, you know, that requires, you know, leadership, but I think more fundamentally, it requires courage, right? You have to be willing to say, well, yeah, we've always done it this way, but, you know, we've got the data and the technologies are now getting to the point where we could do this much better. But that requires some influencing skills, right? And you got to be really sort of effective about communicating, you know, some new ideas. And this is where I think women have an edge, right, in terms of you know, being willing to speak up, being you know, able to influence the organization, thinking broadly about how the emerging technology can be applied. You know, I think there's a lot of opportunities here, and I think that the emphasis in a lot of companies about hiring the data scientist is a bit misplaced, because I think those aren't the people that are going to really make the difference in terms of competitive advantage. I think the people that are going to make the difference are the ones that take the leadership role in thinking through what can be done with these techniques and what can be done with these technologies and how the business can be redesigned to outperform the competition. And I think that's where, you know, you folks are very well positioned.
Thank you, HP. I know we're a little over time, but I do want to open it up for questions, even if it's one or two. So let me open it up. Please unmute your lines, and you have HP for another minute or two. So please go ahead.
Kathleen, there were questions that came up in the chat box, and I can ask maybe one of them and wonder if HP would consider responding to them over an email. There are others over an email for us. There's really good questions here. What if you can take just a minute more of everybody's time, and I'll go to the first question that came to us. Who do you see as leaders in the space? BCG has got the top 50 innovator list and only one financial services company in there. And what do you see? What do you see as developing differently by region globally, as in APAC, EMEA, and the US?
Oh, yeah, great question. So let me start with the regionally. I think that in terms of financial services, I think APAC is clearly number one. I think that the companies in the fintechs in the Asia Pacific region have moved much more quickly to digital channels, to applications of AI than the US or Europe. I think the US is probably second, and I think Europe is been a bit slower, probably in third. Who are the leaders? That's a tough question, because I could almost take any vertical or sub-vertical within banking or within fintech and point at some companies that I think are doing really, really well, and some that are not doing so well. So it probably would not be appropriate for me to list the companies that I think are not doing so well. So I'll just point out a couple of the ones that I think are doing well. In banking, I think Citicorp is clearly a leader, and everything I've seen from Citi has really, really impressed me. Goldman Sachs and their partnership with Apple around Marcus, I think, is something that retail bankers should be a little bit nervous about. The power of Goldman Sachs and the technology of Apple together should scare a lot of retail bankers. I think they're going to surprise everyone. Both of those companies are doing very well, I think, and are really innovating. In the fintech space, I've done some work with LendingTree, for example. I think has done some really good work in this space. One of the examples I talked about was LendingTree. I think they were really smart early on about how they applied AI and machine learning to match up offers with clients. But it's a great question. And again, I could probably spend half an hour just on that one.
Catalina, there are several more questions, but I think respecting everybody's time, maybe we should stop here. And if HP will be generous in a few more, responding to a few more questions over email, we can share it with others over
yeah,
email.
so let me suggest this. I will take those chat questions, and HP, if you would be willing to give us a few sentences of answers, we'll build a little Q&A as a follow-up when we release the video, which we'll do that as well. And we will email it to everybody who's registered on this presentation, and we'll eventually put it on the website as well. But HP, would you be willing to do that? Hopefully we won't overwhelm you.
I would be happy to. And thank you so much for having me. It's been a real honor. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Before I let everybody go, I do want to announce our next program, which is on July 22nd, also a Wednesday, 2 weeks from today. We're going to hear from Stephanie Heider, who is the founder and CEO of Bridging Distance and a leading expert in the areas of remote working, virtual teamwork, global leadership, and electronic body language. And this is so important now for us because this is going to become the wave of the future, even after the pandemic. I'm personally convinced that a lot of companies are going to maintain this communication and training and planning and working methodology around virtual interaction, and we better get good at it. So it'll be our pleasure to have Stephanie Heider join us on the 22nd. Please be on the lookout for the promotions and register. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, HP, for your contribution and for your participation, and for everybody being part of it. Have a great rest of the day, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.